after 7 o'clock. Good evening and welcome to the Traverse City Planning Commission regular meeting on April 4th, 2023. This meeting is called to order. May we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Hasing?
Here.
Commissioner Knapp?
Here.
Commissioner Duturi?
Here.
Commissioner Martin?
Here.
Commissioner Arnold?
Here.
And Commissioners Hershey, Colbert, Treadwell, and Heller, and Shaw are absent.
Thank you very much. Any announcements?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and get started with some announcements. The only one I really have today is regarding our master plan neighborhood listening sessions that we have coming up. They will be held throughout the day on Wednesday, April 19th, as well as Thursday, April 20th. We will be going to different locations throughout the city, different geographic neighborhoods, and having a bit of a structured listening session, but having the opportunity for residents to speak to the consultants, staff, and I would hope also planning commissioners. So you all will get a follow-up email with the schedule and the locations. A postcard will be mailed to all city residents and property owners starting tomorrow, I believe it's going out. So that will be published as well as shared in the Bay Brief and through our social medias. We will also be holding 2 virtual sessions on Saturday, April 22nd for those that can't attend the in-person sessions. And we will likely be constructing some sort of online survey style option where if you can't attend any of the in-person or virtual, you'll still be able to submit feedback that can be captured.
Great, thank you.
They are on for the TV, but not in
Testing, testing.
They are on for the television viewers, but not in this room. Yep. And I don't know how to have that set up.
We will.
Can we turn the house speakers on? Test, test. There they are.
Yeah, I think.
There they are.
Is that better, Adrian?
Can you hear that? That's better now, right? Can you hear that? Is it the house speak? Yeah.
Yes.
I think it's working. I can hear it out in the house,
I can
right?
hear it.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right.
And
All right. We'll look into it. There's still not great hearing in the house. Next, that concludes announcements then?
Yes.
We'll move on to approval of minutes for the March 7th Planning Commission regular meeting. Any comments or Commissioner Duturi?
I move to approve the minutes from the March 7th meeting.
Support.
Excellent. We've got a motion and support. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion carries. Next is old business, discussion on Planning Commission goals and housing efforts to date. Mr. Winter.
yeah, thank you. So I just wanted to bring you up to speed with what we've been doing as staff in the background. So we've been working on going through the actual language and codifying the changes that you have adopted in your goals. So starting with that as the beginning point, and it's a lengthy process because we have to go all through the ordinance and like a fine-tooth comb and make sure that all the changes are made and it's consistent. We're not missing one location where a dimension is mentioned and putting it in another. So we thought we'd have it ready for this meeting. I apologize, it just didn't feel baked enough to where I felt comfortable and didn't want to cause any confusion. The other thing is Laura has been working on creating an ArcGIS story map. So at past meetings, you have seen maps with some of the data related to some of these changes. But with the ArcGIS story map, you can have narrative and context with the map and kind of tell the story and explain it and put in the information. And in some cases, answer the questions that we've been hearing as we go through some of these options. Like, for instance, if you allow duplexes, does that mean we're going to have more vacation rental homes? No, because they're not allowed in the district. So just put that information out there and try to help educate everyone as to what can and can't be done with the items that you all have proposed. So with that, I wanted to give you a little bit of a timeline, and I'll follow up in an email with all these dates and stuff for you. But the idea is, for the April 18th study session, your packet will include the revised zoning language and the story map, and we'll go through and discuss that together. It's just a study session, so there will be no action. We'll have the initial conversation. That is nice because that will be the day before the listening sessions. So it'll actually go in the packet the week before. So the public will have it available as a topic that they can discuss in the master plan listening sessions on the 19th and the 20th, as well as Saturday, the 22nd. Then at May 2nd, at the regular Planning Commission meeting, we will formally introduce the proposed changes and set the public hearing. The public hearing will be for June 6th. May 16th study session, and this is where I want to discuss with you all, we would like to host a community open house instead of the study session that day. We're looking tentatively at the Opera House because of the space, and what we'd like to do is model it after what Chief Teller suggested at the last meeting, and that was kind of like the tree ordinance open house for those that were there. So there was different stations where planning commissioners sat and people would go around and sit and talk, because people want to have dialogue on these issues, and we want to give them the opportunity to do that. And with each of these changes that we're discussing as proposed, we'd like to provide real scenarios. You know, for instance, we heard some great ones at the last meeting where there was the woman there, she lives on a double lot, and she has a 17-year-old child, I believe she said, that has disabilities, and she would like to be able to build a second home on this double lot so they could live a semi-independent life. And people seem to understand that. If you noted during the second public comment, people were like, well, that seems reasonable. So we want to provide real-life scenarios to the problems that we're trying to address through your housing goals and objectives. So that would be May 16th. Then June 6th, you would hold the public hearing on these proposed changes. If satisfied at that time, the Planning Commission could make a recommendation to the City Commission it would then be introduced to the City Commission at their June 19th meeting. And then once introduced by charter, they have to wait at least 14 days before they can take any action on an item. So that would be the July 3rd meeting. Historically, that meeting gets canceled because so many commissioners are out of town and staff during the Cherry Festival week. So if they have other business that requires action, they could potentially take action on this item July 10th at a special meeting or July 17th at a regular meeting. So just wanted to kind of map that out there. I know that was a lot of dates, but Chair Hassing and I met before today's meeting to talk about that. We want to have those opportunities to educate, to have conversations, to hear from the public. And I think this rather, I don't want to say repetitive, but process of staying on top of it every couple weeks and having the chance for the public to weigh in is going to be beneficial in that regard.
So just to clarify, that's a Friday, the 16th,
Of July.
June.
So June 6th, I'm sorry, May 16th study session would be replaced by a community open house, and we picked that date since the meeting's on your.
May.
Yes.
Okay, great.
Then June 6th would be the public hearing.
Perfect. Nope, that's great. I just got May and June confused.
That's fair. But with this approach, this proposed May 16th study session, I needed to know from you all that you would be able to commit to coming to that. We would try to hold it roughly during the regular time as the scheduled meeting, since it's on your calendar. But if we're going to have different tables and different scenarios, then we're going to need more than just Laura and I there to sit at them and hear from people and kind of record information. So just happy to hear your feedback on that, and if this is a direction you're willing to go.
I think it's great. And I'm around.
Okay.
I like it.
I'll do it.
Okay. Either. Cool. All
Yeah,
right.
I like this. It's almost like it would be nice to have it visually, but it's with April, 2 meetings in April discussing housing. Also, listening sessions at the neighborhoods, right, along with the master plan idea. We'll also have opportunities in neighborhoods to touch on housing along with other master plan ideas. But it can definitely get the word out that we're talking about housing, and we want everybody's feedback. And then through May as well, having lots of opportunities to hear and have this engagement. So this feels robust to me in terms of public engagement for this single topic.
Good, thank you. And hopefully through this format, we can provide information for some of the concerns that we've been hearing. You know, at the last meeting, we heard that, well, if you allow duplexes, then outside investors are going to rush in and buy up all the properties. Well, right now we allow duplexes in the R2, which is primarily single family homes. So if that was the case, wouldn't we be seeing that now? So we had our planning and zoning administrator go through, and in the last 10 and a half years, we've only permitted 11 duplexes throughout the city, and many of those have been up in Morgan Farms as part of the planned unit development up there. So it's not really occurring now. Of course, we have no control over the market, but it was comforting to see that, because that you hear that market demand is there right now. So yeah, I think that's kind of our goal, and using that story map as a tool to provide that information. I shared with Chair Hassing too. We've heard concerns about, people taking an old house and dividing it up into 4 units. That really likely won't happen, because any building that has 3 or more units, even if it's an existing building that gets converted into 3 or more units, has to have fire suppression, which can be anywhere from $30,000 to $80,000 depending on converting those old houses. So that would likely occur. You're not probably going to get much of a quadplex unless it was new
But you
construction.
could get a duplex or a triplex or some sort of cohabiting arrangement where you might have up to 4 family units, but they were in a shared space.
Potentially, so it would be like 4 families living together in a single family home.
Yes.
Yes, that is true. You could do that today.
Mhm.
Yep. So that would be regardless of any proposed zoning change. But again, I was interested to hear that. We have a lot of apparently grandfathered triplexes and stuff throughout the city, but because I even asked the construction code officer, or director, so like if you converted an existing structure into a triplex, he's like, yep, you got to sprinkle the whole thing. So, and that kind of goes to the point that David and I were discussing earlier today. Every one of these proposed changes has many layers of limitations for each one. So, the first thing is, does the zoning allow it? The second thing is, do the existing site conditions support it? Does the owner want to do it? Does the owner have the resources to do it? Can the owner find a contractor to do it? So, when you take and apply that to every one of them, each one of these becomes narrower and narrower in its scope of opportunity, which is why it was proposed initially to look at these holistically.
It was comforting also to hear about the duplexes. There's only 11 permits in the last 10 years. When we talk about allowing duplexes in neighborhoods, I think about all the people that have extended family nearby. And if you want to age in place in Traverse City, you could divide your house into 2 units, allow a caregiver or a family member to move in next door. More people get to live in town. You get to age in place versus, if as so many people are just living one and two people in a home, in a dwelling. There's a lot of empty space in houses, and so one would think, we want to mitigate against unwanted consequences. We don't want to see, Traverse City neighborhoods lose their character, or developers from outside, investors come in and bulldoze everything and change it all up. But if it's not happening in R2 already, what it means is the opportunity is there. If we were to allow duplexes within our residential neighborhoods as they stand, it's going to open up that opportunity for the people that actually live here, for the needs that they have. And that's looking like a really positive outcome to these potential changes. So I'm excited to discuss further.
Cool. All right, well, that's all I had on that. Just kind of wanted to bring you guys up to date. We didn't have a study session last month because of a lot of open houses related to the planning efforts, but we have been working on it in the background, and we'll be bringing it to you shortly.
All right. If there's no other comments, we will move on to new business. Certainly, yes. We will do public comment. We'll open up now to public comment. Thank you for the reminder. If you'd like to speak on this topic, feel free to approach the mic. Please state your name, your address, whether you're a Traverse City resident, and you have 5 minutes.
I hope that when you go through your meetings with people, that you don't dwell on the housing problem. I believe that all of us are very, very familiar with the housing difficulties that we have, not only in Traverse City, but in this whole region. And I've been very, very pleased to hear both Warren Call and what's Rachel? the
Johnson?
Yes. I've been very pleased to hear both of them addressing this more as a regional problem than as just a city problem that we have to solve within our city. I believe that what you need to be going out and talking with the neighborhoods about is your 6-bullet plan for rezoning all of Traverse City, basically. And I believe that most residents are very unfamiliar with this. And it will change the face of our city. Not all at once, but it will change it gradually. And it may change it with the lot that's right next door to you, too. I have put up your simplified version here of your 6-point plan. And there, if you count those stars, there are more than 6 of them there, because embedded within each of those 6 points are other points that should be made too. So I'm hoping that when you go out to the public, you will talk about zoning, not about the need for housing. When you talk about, and I talked with Mr. Hassing on our way in, he talked about, again, 2 people in these large houses. And I look at all of you, and you may not have grandchildren yet, but when your children leave home, they come home with a lot more people than they left with. And sometimes you need that space in your house, or want the space in your house. And I think that we should stop criticizing people who want to have just 2 people in a large house, because you don't really know what's going on behind those doors. We have 2 people in our house, but we have 3 children and 15 grandchildren. And they all love to be in Traverse City at the same time, and it's very expensive to be in Traverse City. So I think you really need to listen to a lot of different viewpoints here. I also would like to know how well we are adhering already to our ADU ordinance. I know of one instance where there are 2 ADUs, and the owner lives in my neighborhood, but lives on neither of the other 2 properties. And I think that the public needs to know how often this has happened, because that's one of the very important requirements of the ADU ordinance. And I don't know how well it's been adhered to. So I think that is something the public needs to know going out. I'd also like you to take a look at your July 3rd date. I think it's unrealistic to think you're going to get very many people on the night before the 4th of July coming down to City Hall. And in the past, we quite often have had the dates that are adjacent to these holidays or the Cherry Festival canceled. So when you are thinking about your schedule, I think you should look at that. So I don't know why the microphones are not working. I don't understand this. Is mine working?
Yes.
Good, I'm probably shouting into everyone's ears. But it's very rude, I think, to have people in the audience and not have the microphones working in this room. So I hope that that will be rectified soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Rossi. If no one else wishes to speak, we'll close public comment. Oh, we'll keep it open.
Caroline Kennedy, 1925 Seneca Street. So I apologize, I walked in a couple minutes late, and I won't keep you. But I've been looking around the whole area. I live over by that NMC East Bay area, right near Munson and 8th. And there's a lot of development on that end of the 8th Street corridor that's less than desirable, I would say. I understand the properties on the east side of town might have been less expensive than the properties on the west side, but I see developing in this community a division between people with money and people without money, and I don't think it's good, and I don't think the extension of commercial property there, or like a higher use of commercial property in this location is helpful at all. We're trying to preserve our neighborhoods, we're trying to preserve housing. And when I look at, say, that big development that went on up behind, the Comfort Inn on 8th, right on 8th Street. It's 4 stories tall. It's that Sam Flamont building. That is hideous in that neighborhood. And that's a really nice little neighborhood there on 8th Street. Right across the street from it, near the cemetery, and right down from it, and around behind it. So when it was hotels, it was more in fitting. It was more, what do they call that when it's a good size for the public to be walking? You know, I don't know if any of you go by that building. I go by it several times a day, and every single time I'm just irritated beyond belief because we don't have design standards here that demand that we have something that looks decent. Even if it was legal by zoning standards to build there, which I know it was, it is hideous, and it brings down those other neighborhoods. And I don't have anything against the property owners here who want to, you know, be able to use their property for a better purpose. I can totally understand that. But at this point, I don't, I think a commercial use or a residential use is better than what they're asking for. And I guess a hired residential use we'd have to see. So that's what I have to say at the moment, because I'm not very well educated on the whole thing.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. With that, we'll close public comment. And we will move on to new business, consideration of introducing a conditional zoning and request submitted by Empire Sunset Investment, LLC, to conditionally rezone the properties, 3 properties contiguously on Munson Avenue. For introduction, Mr. Winter.
Yeah, thank you. So we have 3 properties at 523, 525, and 551 Munson Avenue that we've received an application for conditional rezoning on. The 523 and the 525, the north and center property, are currently zoned C1. The southernmost property is zoned R1B, and the applicant is asking to rezone it to C2. And he has volunteered the following conditions: that all the C2 uses would be allowed except the adult use marijuana retailer, brew pubs. A building over 1 story shall not exceed 4,500 square feet in gross floor area per floor. No outdoor amplified entertainment. No use shall be open to the public between the hours of 10 and 6. And rooftop access is private, and no private rentals between the hours of 10 and 6 a.m. So just to kind of give you an overview of the properties, here's where they're located. They're just south of 8th Street on Munson. So the northernmost lot is currently home to Third Coast Bakery, if you're familiar with that. The center lot, it always struck me as kind of interesting. I didn't really understand the development pattern of the parking lot there, but it was brought to my attention by the owner that that is the site of the former Social Security Administration office, which I believe had a water leak issue that condemned the building, and so it had to be torn down. And then right here we have the vacant R1B lot that the applicant owns as well. So we can see again that the top 2 lots, or the middle and northernmost one, are zoned C1 with the R1B zoning down here. There is an undeveloped road called Perry Street that surrounds the property on the east and the south side. So when we consider zoning changes, zoning should be consistent with the master plan. So we look at the future land use map. The future land use map calls for this area to be designated as the TC4 corridor neighborhood, which is the least formally developed of the 2 types of commercial neighborhoods. The focus is on commercial innovation. The overall level of intensity generated within the confines of each district in this neighborhood class tends to be lower for commercial uses. Now specifically, zoning ordinances are required by law, master plans are required by law to have a zoning element. And that says, in order to achieve this future land use goal or category, what zoning changes need to be made. And specifically, it calls out the C1 district along Munson Avenue should be rezoned to C2 to allow for more uses, which is consistent with the core principles of the TC4 neighborhood. So this request is consistent, at least for the C1 and the two C1 properties. And we can see, though, that this whole area is within TC4. Now, keep in mind, zoning boundaries follow strict lines of parcels and things like that. Future land use category boundaries are a little more fluid because they're open for interpretation. As staff, though, we would recognize and agree with the applicant that this is not a great use for great location for a single-family home right along the highway there. The visibility makes it prime for commercial, and we want commercial along our corridors for economic development. That's how we make it here. So moving on, I will say the main difference, we've provided the categories for you. The main difference between C2 and C1 is that it allows for retail. C1 is mostly office use. And I bring this up because this might be something the Planning Commission wants to consider. I know we got a lot on our plate right now, or you do, as we get down the line. C1, the office district use, is proving to be somewhat problematic because we have so much extra office space in the city right now because people are working from home, and we're getting calls all the time from people who lost their office tenant, can't get another office tenant, and are trying to find any viable use of a property so a building doesn't sit vacant. So putting that out there as a discussion. In fact, that is the main reason why the applicant, who is here tonight, who may speak if you so wish, would like to go through and do the C2 zoning. So right now, his only tenant on these properties is Third Coast Bakery. They're doing quite well, but per our zoning standards in C1, that specific retail use is not allowed to expand. Now, if it's zoned to C2, he can build a new building with the intent of housing Third Coast Bakery in it as kind of the anchor tenant, and then having other tenants that build off that synergy. So that was kind of noted in the staff report, that seeking out like businesses. Now, of course, he could sell the property and someone else could have a different vision, which is why he volunteered to do the conditional rezoning. He took the time to go and talk to all the neighbors, heard their concerns, and was willing to offer up those restrictions. I will say, myself and the city attorney, we're not big fans of conditional rezoning because it creates a somewhat burdensome problem in the future, because if I'm not here and she's not here and our planning and zoning administrator is not here, how are they going to know what the limitations are? You know, it ends up getting buried in paperwork. It's not in the zoning ordinance. It's easy for mistakes to be made. So it's ultimately up to the Planning Commission whether they want to move forward with the conditional rezoning, or as the attorney noted today, you have full authority just to recommend that it just be traditionally rezoned without the conditions. That's up to you. Most of the time we see conditional rezoning when they're trying to build something specific that needs a different zoning classification and they want to limit uses. So a classic example that many of you may recall is the TC Lofts. So they were C4B, but they got conditionally rezoned to C4C to allow that community space and mechanical room above 45 feet, but they limited the uses that space could be used for. Like, remember, they couldn't use the dwelling units up there and things like that. So that was about 2 years ago that we discussed it. There were some concerns in the emails that you saw that someone could build, if this gets rezoned, a 45-foot tall apartment building, they could do that today because that's what the zoning allows. The dimensional standards are roughly the same, so we still have the 20-foot rear setback from residential properties, 45-foot height limit. It does allow an increase from 60% to 70% impervious surface, which is typical with the higher intensity commercial use. And as far as the rooftop stuff, you know, you all adopted an amendment less than a year ago that regulated rooftop amenities and the amount of space above the minimum height that could be in there, as well as the hours of operation. So a lot of that is built into it already. So when we looked at this analysis, again, it's very consistent, lines up perfectly with what the master plan calls for this area. We don't see any site limitations. We do have, again, setbacks, barrier requirements such as fencing and berms and landscaping vegetation around parking lots and things like that to help protect surrounding residential. And that's true everywhere because all along this corridor we have commercial that's adjacent to residential and none of it's conditionally rezoned. So with that, I will hand it over. And again, as I mentioned, Mr. Collins, the applicant, is here today, and I'm sure if you wish to ask him anything, he'd be willing to provide answers.
Thank you, Mr. Winter. I just want to note as well, during the meeting here, that it says in our packet that Third Coast Bakery, it's almost like an existing non-conforming, in that it can only exist as a retail and dining establishment if it was built in a building before 2003. So not even, they couldn't even rebuild their own enterprise on this land. So just wanted to make that public as well. Commissioners, Mr. Treadwell.
Yes, I've got 3 lines of questioning for, I believe, Director Winter. The first is, as you show in our future land use map, this is the TC4 area. But just to clarify, this is from the previous master plan. We haven't gotten to setting new zoning recommendations for future land use in the current master plan process.
Correct.
So our eyes as a city for future land use could change as that process continues getting underway over the next 6 months or so.
Yeah, but I would be fully confident that properties fronting along Munson would be eyed for commercial use. Yeah.
Second, recognizing the area shown as Perry Street, is there a process that the city can do for areas that are platted as streets but currently unused as such, and can be identified as unlikely to see future use? Say, if Perry Street dead-ended on East Bay, then that could be a reasonable continuation of public access to that waterfront. But here, it doesn't, at least just looking at the plat map, it doesn't create additional parcels having access on, or future parcels having access on a road, since all the properties along Agosa that back into Perry still have frontage on Agosa, and all the properties along the Munson corridor are, as you mentioned in your memo, more aligned with commercial use. So since I wouldn't want to see another road intersecting with Munson Avenue in between 8th Street and airport access, is there something we can do to essentially, if this property owner or say some of the residential properties on Agosa wanted that extra however many feet of property, that we could declare it abandoned?
So if I understand the question, is there a process to vacate
Yes.
a right-of-way? There is, yes. And it has to go through the city commission and through the circuit court. I do not see this being likely developed as a street. I don't know that MDOT would allow that additional street intersection there.
That's what
And
I'm recognizing in this plan.
it's only 33 feet wide, which is quite narrow. That's alley width, even though it's
Yeah.
identified as a street technically. But I don't know that the city is not always quick to vacate right away, because if we need future utility needs, we're giving that option up. So,
Which I'd say, I recognize that you have other things on your plate, but if there is staff capability, I would be interested in seeing, this seems like a prime example. There might be other cases in the city of unutilized streets that could be vacated and are perhaps not in the best long-term planning for the future to have them as a potential street.
yeah, I mean, I don't think the city's looking to create new streets where we already have
Yeah.
street access. We're having a hard time maintaining the quality of our streets as it is. But when we've gotten these requests before, it gets circulated to all the departments and they weigh in on them. And typically the recommendation is not to vacate for the fact that it hamstrings us in the future for potential utility needs and places where we would have to run water or sewer, and we'd be therefore limiting ourselves by giving up the public right away.
Yeah, I mean, I can understand that. It just seems that in this case, there already are utilities running along Agosa or along Munson that would provide water, sewer, electric, gas to any of these parcels. So,
Yeah. Still remains the same.
and then my third line, which I guess is going at the master plan and future land use. Previously, I had specifically identified this exact sort of one or two parcels of C1 zoning along a corridor and asked Director Winter, hey, is there a way that we could go through and identify what would be a better zoning classification rather than just having this patchwork of individual parcels that don't meet the overall zoning classification? And your response was that is spot zoning and we don't do that. But along the Munson Avenue corridor, you could very well argue that there isn't much consistency in our zoning. There is hotel resort as the predominance of those parcels between Fair and the city limits, but you also have C1, C2, R1A, R1B, hotel resort. You've got hospital. You've got NMC. And it would seem reasonable to try to have a little more consistency, and especially C1, I would say, is one of the odder categories in that. Either C2 or hotel resort are a little more consistent along that corridor. And frankly, considering the disordered development that we have seen in recent decades, both along this corridor and going forward, although in the mid-century period was where a lot of our hotels ended up getting built, we have seen hotels get converted into elder care facilities or apartments or even a dorm for the college. And perhaps this would be a better area for just general multifamily housing and various forms of commercial activity, including retail.
Yes, then this request aligns with what you're saying then,
Yes.
because multifamily is allowed, but retail's not, but this request would allow the retail.
And what I'm saying is I'd be interested in maybe it can't be done with this request as it's worded, but in rezoning the other C1 parcels along this corridor to C2.
Yeah, and most often we wait till we get a request from the property owner, because if they're not even requesting it, then they're probably not looking to develop what could be done by C2. We would want to make sure that rather than take a blanket approach, that the proper level analysis is conducted, so you're not creating unintended consequences through nonconformities by just sweeping through and changing them. So I think this approach, by implementing the master plan recommendations when a property owner comes forth with a consistent one, is the right approach.
I remember having a discussion with our previous planning director before COVID about C1. C1, of course, office space is not in high demand post-COVID, but even before COVID, that C1 was sort of like an unused zone, and it was one that I wouldn't mind targeting it for future consideration of C2, just to bring it up to date with how businesses operate. And nowadays C1 is sort of it's worth looking at whether it's worth having so much C1 property that seems kind of limited with how people want to use commercial land.
And I would add to that, I think the right approach there is not focusing on converting C1 to C2 as much as modifying C1. because C1 is very adjacent usually to residential, as we can see in this example, and think about the uses there that would be most appropriate. That's why C1 is limited to 4,500 square foot building footprint as opposed to the 6,000 in C2. So again, that's why I mentioned at the beginning, something to put on your radar as we get through some of these planning processes and this housing stuff is taking a look at C1 and where we have it throughout the city and what additional uses may be appropriate.
Great point. Yeah, thank you.
Well, you say that this is adjacent to residential, which it is. It's also adjacent to C2, and we have other parcels of C1 along this corridor that are either adjacent to C2 on one side or wedged in between parcels of hotel resort.
True. But I'm going to bring your focus back to the application in front of you, which is to rezone these from C1 to C2
And R1B.
in R1B. Yep.
The R1B property is, it's understandable why there's not a house sitting there. You know, this is 2 highways. Is it 3 highways at that point? It's, that's a lot of traffic
No, it's just 2.
in front of a house. But a multifamily house, multifamily building would do, I think, very well there. You know, right next to 8th Street and all the amenities that this property provides. And I read all the emails from the residents in Agoza Trail, and it is, and I went to the property. I parked in the strange parking lot, and I walked along Perry, and I love all the big trees, you know, and the proximity to the bay is really wonderful, and you know, it's a great spot. And you know, if only everybody could have, you know, whatever they think is a precious part of their property, you know, remain that way forever, you know, and have control over neighboring properties. But as we all know, you know, we live in a city and we share it with our community, and that's what living in a city is all about. We have these amenities because we are all together. And I think that this, you know, I for one support the idea of this whole property moving to C2, but I'm also like, you know, I feel for whatever that might mean for the perceptions of the people on Agoza Trail, but I also note that there's big, beautiful trees on Perry and on Agoza and on the property that exists there already. And those are going to remain, you know, largely, definitely on Perry. Nobody's going to be cutting anything down there. And I hope that there's no plans to develop any sort of road on Perry. But you know, there are these natural buffers that exist. And anyway, that helps me appreciate this request. But Commissioner Duterte?
It just seems like it was never, it seems like it was piecemealed before. It seems like it should have been it's definitely not R1B, not that little corner of it. It seems like we have multiple regions within the city where you can tell, if you're looking at a map, where additional lobbying had happened because you're trying to appease to the big neighborhoods around town. It just doesn't make sense to me why right up against Munson you would have had an R1B, especially in that tight little corner where the light comes up to it. It just doesn't make sense in that little spot there. And like everybody else has already said, C1 is also a weird, funny use there. So it seems like we were just trying to fit what had already existed. And I think the Third Coast Bakery building is just so tiny. It could grow. It could be a multi-use building. Like, it makes a lot of sense to me. And the parking lot is giant. Like, there's so many other things that we could be creative about in that region, and that's exciting to me. So I fully support it. I guess my logistical question would be the traditional rezoning versus the conditional rezoning and what that looks like in terms of a motion, and then also for the applicant. I know we've talked about this before, and I know you've answered this question before, and I just can't remember. But what would those options be?
Procedurally, you mean?
Yes,
So there is a motion in the report today, a recommended
for
motion.
conditional.
For conditional, I would say move forward with that as, to set the public hearing. After that, you can make a recommendation to the city commission. So it'll go to them with the application for conditional, but potentially your recommendation just to do it
Just to-
traditionally, and then it's up to them to make that final decision.
great.
And they're the ones, because a conditional rezoning is essentially a contract with the city, so they have to sign the contract
Okay.
that the attorney will be creating.
But this is the owner of the property that put these conditions in place voluntarily. So even if it was upzone or rezoned to C2 without conditions, there's still, it's the same owner that's going to be building the thing, and unless they sell and vacate and don't build the thing, it's going to happen with as they describe with these conditions in place. So there is that safety net. Mr. Arnold.
Yeah, I totally agree that it seems like an oversight that especially that R1B property isn't zoned for commercial. I mean, it doesn't, nowhere else in the city do we see on a main thoroughfare that we have residential zoning. You know, that's a spot that would do really well as commercial, especially because obviously Third Coast is doing very well as commercial, especially if they're looking at expanding. And that's a valuable service too that I think a lot of people in the city and in the region have come to value. You know, Third Coast is making like gluten-free products, and they're making, I would say, unconventional. They're providing an unconventional service that is valued by a lot of people, and so preventing them from expanding because you know they have a C1 zoning in a spot that really probably should be C2, and doesn't fit with the use case that's been there for the last couple of years. Doesn't really make any sense to me. I also like that Perry Street does provide a very natural buffer between the residential area and those commercial, those proposed commercial buildings. You said I think it was 33 feet wide, which would be larger than the setback would be anyway. So, and having those big trees there, having that nice vegetation there, also helps knock down some of the noise and provides a nice visual barrier too. I think it's a spot that really makes sense for commercial and doesn't necessarily make sense for the oversized parking lot and vacant lot that it is right now. I like the conditions. I think at least the idea of the conditions, especially because I think it makes the residents much more comfortable with it, and those aren't what the owner has agreed to give up aren't necessarily uses that we'd maybe love to see in that spot anyway. Especially because I'm not even sure that would be a site that's eligible for an adult use marijuana retailer. It's so
Maxed
close
out.
to other, yeah. It's so close to all the other spots in town. And I'm not sure anyone's thrilled, business owner or not, about the idea of having something open until 2 a.m. on Munson Avenue, right next to a residential neighborhood. So, I think it makes a lot of sense to take it to C2, to try to expand that business. And I'd like to hear, obviously, through the public hearing process from the owner and from residents, and see, where their comfort levels are and what the owner's intentions are with the property. It's one thing if his intention is just to sell it and to the highest bidder, which may result in something that the neighbors aren't as comfortable with. But as stated in the request, if the intent is to provide the community with a single site with multiple offerings compatible with the gluten-free, dairy-free, allergy-friendly focus of the current tenant, that'd be great. We like to see more of that. That's something that makes Traverse City a more inclusive place, which is never a bad thing. So,
Thanks. And I also want to note that 33 feet buffer is in addition to the 20-foot setback that would be against the property line. So that's a 53-foot setback from the property lines on Agosa. If there's no other
I would just
comments,
see if the chair would be interested in asking the applicant who is here tonight,
Yeah.
who may be able to answer some of those questions.
yes.
If he's-
I,
Yep, please, John.
yes, please do. Thank you.
Yes, John Collins, I'm the applicant. I just want to clarify on the conditions. We worked with the community and we got some feedback from the community. And although we took a look at it, we feel like those conditions actually address the most significant concerns the community has. And really, and I agree with you on that, what you were discussing on that one specific property. And the conditions aren't going to prevent that from happening on this property. And I have no intention of selling it. That's not why I bought it. And although I recognize, you can't guarantee what's going to happen tomorrow. But all I can tell you is my intention is to do what I said on the application. The conditions actually, for the size of the building over 1 story, is identical to the C1 building size, not the C2 building size. So it's a little smaller. And the operating hours match the C1 operating hours, not the C2 operating hours, to reflect the concerns that the neighborhood had. So I just wanted to clarify where those conditions came from. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. And we do appreciate the effort to communicate with neighbors and to do right by our community. And that's great to see. We see here at the Planning Commission, we see requests for rezoning where it's kind of a mystery about what the intent of the applicant will end up being. But that kind of communication and proactive communication is great to see. Commissioners? Actually, should we do the public comment first before the...
Motion first, and then open up.
Well, we will entertain a motion if anybody has one.
After the motion, yeah. So I'll move that the request initiated by Empire Sunset Investments LLC, authorized applicant, to conditionally rezone the properties commonly known as 523, 525, 551 Munson Avenue from C1 Office Service District, C1, that was Office Service District, R1B Single Family Dwelling District to C2 Neighborhood Center District be introduced and scheduled for a public hearing for the Planning Commission regular meeting on May 2nd, 2023, with the recommendation for a traditional rezone. Is that
I don't think you would need that last part in at this point.
okay? Oh, that's after
After
the public hearing.
Just for the public
If
hearing.
collectively you think the planning
Great.
commission wants to head that way.
That's perfect.
But I would just move on with the application as
Great.
presented.
All right, we have a motion.
I second.
Excellent. We have a motion and support. Now I'd like to turn it over to, for public comment. I'll open up public comment. If anybody has anything to say on this topic, please approach the mic. Please state your name, address, whether you're a Traverse City resident, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. My name's Jackie Anderson. I live at 1725 Comanche Street, so a few blocks away from the property that under discussion. I have a couple of clarifying questions that I wanted to ask. One has to do with additional driveway access off of Munson. The section of this property that I'm familiar with now simply has one driveway that used to serve both the old Social Security section as well as now serves Third Coast. And I wondered how many additional driveway accesses might be recommended for this and what the impact particularly, I've seen enough near misses and left turns in and out of Third Coast to know that it's a dangerous intersection already. So that was one consideration. The other one that I'd like to second Ms. Kennedy's comments about the Flamont property on 8th Street. And any zoning that we can do to minimize the likelihood of another one of those being put on this property would be greatly appreciated. You know, as I'm sure you know, this property, the Flamont property, is being marketed for short-term rental ownership as a Bayview Bay access property with really high prices. And if there is a way through zoning that we can minimize the risk of having yet another one of those in our neighborhood, I would be very grateful. That's it.
Thank you. Well, for that, I will then close public comment. Commissioners, Mr. Windsor?
Yeah, for the benefit of the commissioners, I'll just address those questions. We would find it very unlikely that another driveway would be permitted there, either by MDOT or the city, based on just access management calls and driveway spacing that we require. And the change from C1 to C2 would not increase the allowance of additional vacation home rentals beyond what's there today, which is only 25% of any dwelling units that are constructed.
Could either the city or MDOT request that the driveway be aligned to be immediately across from Munson's driveway?
Internally, we've talked about that as staff, but that would have to be part of the site plan process.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then it would still be only one driveway on the whole parcel?
Yes. Yeah. For access management, we really tried to work with them to limit that. And in some instances, we do have it in the code where you need spacing requirements, so we're not getting them right next to each other and stuff.
Yeah, which would further, if you moved it down, one, you'd have two driveways immediately across from each other, but then it would further get the Third Coast and whatever else this parcel ends up being driveway further away from the 8th Street intersection.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Well, we have motion and support. So if we're ready to vote, we'll go ahead and do that. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed? The motion carries. With this, we'll look forward to talking more about this at the public hearing, May 2nd. Thank you all very much. As we move on now to reports, we start with the Board of Zoning Appeals. I misspoke at our last regular meeting that we didn't have a meeting, but we did, in fact, on...
It was a pretty short meeting.
It was a short meeting. It was, I had forgotten about it momentarily, but it was on, what was it, Valentine's Day.
Mm-hmm.
It was a property on Bates Road, and they were asking for a variance because they were close to their rear. They wanted to build a garage and second story above it over an existing garage that was too close to their rear property line. This was a corner property, and this occurs sometimes on corner properties where the house is facing kind of there's not a full depth property is the way lined up. So what looks like a side property is actually the rear property line. And so the 20-foot, it was too close to the 20-foot setback.
Yeah, and it also has to do with how the house organically developed. Like the house might have been built, but then when the garage got added to it, it got added in an area that was actually closer to the rear setback rather than putting it in what would appear to be the front yard, which would have prevented any future setback issues.
And in Traverse Heights, this house likely existed before the road did. So anyway, we granted it because they were basically building over the already existing footprint, and there was so much neighborhood support, and there was just precedent already to allow this to happen. So it was an easy grant. Anyway, that was from the BZA. Other reports from the City Commission? Mr. Treadwell? Anything beyond what we read in the news?
For which I have been legally advised to say no comment in general.
Anything that you can comment on?
So we do not currently have our last manager. We have an interim manager. We had a very short discussion about SALT this year compared to an hour and a half discussion last year.
Good. Great. All right, thank you. The Master Plan Leadership Team.
Yeah, we'll be meeting this Thursday, I do believe.
Yes.
Yep, we have any continued conversations on the housing chapter, which we covered the last time we met. We'll be reviewing the draft chapter on sustainable tourism, as well as the chapter that you typically have in master plans that reviews and summarizes past plans of the city to kind of paint the historic picture there. So we'll have that meeting at 3:30 on Thursday in the committee room.
Great. The Mobility Action Plan Leadership Team.
We did not meet last week because it was spring break and there was going to be such a high absent rate that we did not do that. Plus, it was so close to our open house that they didn't have a lot of time to synthesize that feedback yet. But staff is continuing to meet with them weekly. We have that meeting tomorrow, and then we'll be looking forward to the next month for our leadership team.
All right. And then from the Planning Department at large.
Just basically all the stuff we've been
Right.
talking about, all these plans and listening sessions and housing
Yes.
topics. So,
Okay.
yep, working through it.
Great. We'll open up now for public comment in general. If anybody from the public has anything to speak on any topic, they're welcome to now. Please, of course, say your name, your address, whether you're a Traverse City resident, and you have 5 minutes. Thanks.
Adrienne Rossi, 312 West 7th Street, again. And talking about your upcoming open houses and your past open houses, remind me to compliment you on the well-done open houses that have been held from the fall going forward. I have really appreciated how well organized they've been. The people that have been the leadership people have just been very knowledgeable and very receptive to any comments that the public has made. I just have been very impressed with them, and I thank you very much for your part in staging them. Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Ms. Rossi. It's good to hear. If there's no other comments, we'll close public comment. Commissioners, any other comments, ideas, shout-outs?
Happy 2 days worth of spring.
Yes, excellent. Okay.
Until we go back to, hopefully it's not winter, but it will be at least a little colder and wetter.
I don't like to hold my breath until later. So anyway, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you all very much. Have a good night.
We're trying to convince them here that despite your desires, it's too early to plant your plants outside.
Oh, gosh, no.
Well, it depends on what plants
At
you're
least another
planting
month.
outside.
Where did you?
I have started my.